The Super Regional round is set, and the SEC took a major hit last weekend in the regional round. 13 teams made the postseason, and 9 were sent home. Peter Burns of the SEC Network and LSU alum will join us on this edition of the Stingray Show to go into a deep dive of regionals last weekend and the Super Regional round this weekend, right now on the Stingray Show. And with all of that, I want to welcome you inside the Friday evening edition of the Stingray Show. And hey, 13 teams out of the SEC made the postseason and left standing in the Super Regional round: Auburn, LSU, Tennessee, and Arkansas. That's it. That's all that remains out of the mighty SEC. And to break down the super regional round and to recap what happened last weekend, here is SEC Network's on and LSU alum, Mr. Peter Burns. Peter, how are things with you as we sit here as we get ready for Super Regional round of SEC baseball?
Yeah, Stingray, I would be a lot better if we had more than 4
I
teams
know.
still alive. You just talked about it, the 13 teams. It was another unbelievable season. You know me, like as much as I love college football and basketball was great this year, baseball and softball is my favorite time of year. And a lot of it has to do with how dominant the SEC traditionally is. And
Yep.
we just didn't really necessarily see it over the first couple of a couple of days of the regionals. But still got 4 teams. We're guaranteed at least one team over in Omaha, which is going to be the winner of Tennessee and Arkansas. So,
Yep.
I feel better about it now than I did probably right when the games are going on back in studio over the weekend.
So, Peter, of the regional round, which one was the biggest shocker to you of a team that you had high hopes of going to Omaha that is sitting there at home right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy to say Vanderbilt just because they were the overall number 1 seed, and mostly because Stingray, I had seen them in Hoover just play flawless baseball.
Right.
They took one of those games late into the tournament with 13 hits, and they were all 13 singles. So they found a way to kind of get that done. Then the next game over in the finals, they're hitting the ball out of the ballpark. They had the best ERA, the best fielding, the best hitting all week long in Hoover, and you're thinking this team is coming together right at the right time. And then I don't think they even batted 130 collectively as a team at home. So I think that was a big shock. Texas just looked lethargic to
Yeah.
me. I mean, it's a big ballpark. But again, UTSA looked more like the dominant 2 seed than Texas did. And I was really, I would say, not shocked, but really disappointed to see the lack of a good crowd over in Austin.
Hmm.
And I mean, well, you know it. I mean, whether you're a Mississippi State fan or Ole Miss fan or LSU fan or Arkansas, Tennessee now, like when you're part of SEC baseball, especially when regional play, the crowds are incredible. And
Right.
Tennessee was kind of like or Texas was more like a wine and cheese crowd, and they just didn't bring it. I think that led to them not getting a lot of juice and they ultimately get shut out. Georgia, again, another one where they hit the ball really well, but man, Wes Johnson, remember the former pitching coach for Paul Skeens and LSU, they got to find some arms because this is a couple of years that they've had great seasons. They hit the ball all out of the ballpark in a smaller field out there in Athens, but then yet they cannot get it back to Omaha. So, I mean, those are probably the biggest surprises that I had, and now we're left with just 4 teams left.
Peter, what about Ole Miss losing to
Yeah.
Murray State?
Yeah, I mean that was difficult simply for the fact of I saw Ole Miss use a bunch of younger arms in Hoover,
Hmm.
and it felt like they had kind of put something together, and yet none of those guys showed up, especially in that last game because you knew the bats were going to come alive. You knew that they were going to be able to score some runs, and they were able to, but the fact that you just couldn't be coming from that far behind. I
Yep.
mean, it was almost one of the greatest comebacks in my goodness, SEC, if not college baseball history, down 12-3 and Wright State or who are they playing? I'm trying to think. They're all over my
Murray
head.
State.
Murray State, yeah. Like they were out of arms. They literally had one guy left, and their coach was just like, hey, we're going to throw them to the wolves. And Ole Miss started rolling, but it was just too much of a lead to get over. So disappointed about that with Mike, but again, this goes to show you too, the transfer portal works both ways, Stingray, where you get a bunch of players that are in that want to come play SEC baseball, but then at the same point, you get a bunch of good players that never really found a comfortable spot, so they would transfer out to some of these kind of mid-major squads. And sure, those guys had a lot of success against SEC squads. They got a chip on their shoulder, and you tip your cap to them.
So, Peter, we actually have a new coach in the SEC there at Mississippi State. He will be announced soon. What are your thoughts on Mississippi State taking the Virginia headman to come to Starkville?
Yeah, Brian O'Connor is always one of those guys that when you talk about, hey, who are the best coaches out in college baseball, O'Connor's name is out there.
Right.
And I, knowing and talking to Zach Selman a couple of weeks ago over the SEC spring meetings, I asked them, I said, hey, State's done a great job. Justin's done a good job as the interim head coach. And, he kind of, not without telling me breaking news, but just kind of said, listen, we're kind of zoning in on some people. We feel confident that we're going to get one of the best. And when he hired Brian O'Connor, I'm like, that makes sense. Guys won it before, and now he's excited to get down to one of the crown jewels of all of college baseball. So I know they're fired up over at Dudy Noble, rightfully so. And that place deserves a new, fresh beginning, and they're going to get it.
And especially because that ballpark was not made for regular season, it was made for postseason baseball. And since the 21 season, when they won a national championship, they have not hosted a regional or a super regional.
Yeah, and I mean that's wild to think of. And Lamonis will go down in Starkville history as the first guy to bring home a national championship, which was amazing. But again, at some point you get enough time after that. Like even Ole Miss, after they won the title, they struggled for a couple of years, but then Bianco had them playing fairly good this year until they ran into a buzzsaw over in Oxford. But it's a new beginning for him. I think that, he's making some good staff hires, so they're going to have some. They're going to have to, they're going to have a fighting chance going forward, and I like that for him.
So, Peter, what are your thoughts on the first few seasons for Rob Vaughn here at Alabama? Because this year they won 40-plus games for the first time in a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, you get guys like Justin LeBron in, you get other great players, and so there's no doubt that he can recruit well. The question is just kind of like how we've been bringing it up, Wes Johnson over at Georgia. Sooner or later, people are only going to take you seriously as a baseball program on how you advance to the postseason. And that's something that Bama hasn't done. Now, you have to build the momentum. Tony Vitello built the momentum there. And every time I talk to Rob, and I have him on my Sirius XM show, I'm blown away about how I think this guy gets it. So you just got to break through once. And I feel like once you break through, all of a sudden people, and recruits and the transfer portal guys realize that Tuscaloosa is an unbelievable place to play, a great athletic department, a good ballpark, and Rob's a great guy to play for. You still, though, and I saw I got the contract extension, which is great because it shows, hey, we're not wavering on him. I like that, but you got to win. I mean, the reason why we're talking about LSU, the reason why we're talking about Auburn right now, Tennessee, even Arkansas, those guys have made it to Omaha, and that's the expectation level when you coach in the SEC.
So, Peter, hold that thought. We're up against our first break, and when we come back, you and I are going to talk about the super regional round that begins this evening. That's on the other side of the break. You're listening to the Stingray Show. Peter Burns will return with me right after this. Welcome back inside the Stingray Show. My guest this evening is Peter Burns of the SEC Network. And Peter, briefly, before we get to the super regional round, another big topic last week was the SEC meeting the SEC coaches meetings down in Destin. What were some of your biggest takeaways from that meeting this past week over in Destin?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway that I got there, Stingray, was just everybody's still frustrated that they don't really know what the rules are going to be between the house settlement and NIL and transfer portal. Most of the coaches, and I agree with them, that there should probably be one transfer portal. Do it in late January after the season's over. College football playoff is done. Open it up for 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks, or whatever, and then be done with it. So that way guys exactly know who their team is. When you have two different transfer portals, guys have a hard time of telling us. And it hurts us, the fans, because I don't know who's on our teams right now,
Yeah.
right? Like, we used to have spring games, we used to have depth charts. Now those guys don't want to release any of that because of the transfer portal. So for me, it hurts. And unless you are going to practice every single day, we don't get a chance to see those guys as much and really preview the season. So I think that's one thing. And also the idea of this 4 automatic qualifiers for the Big Ten and the SEC, I think that's pretty much dead in the water. I think the SEC is going to go along with a lot of people and go, hey, we'll take 5 automatic qualifiers, 11 at large bids, and let the chips fall where they may. And I think that's good for the sport.
So, Peter, now let's dive into the super regional round, and we will start with the school that you are most familiar with, your alma mater, LSU, taking on West Virginia in the Baton Rouge Super Regional. Give us your thoughts on that matchup.
Yeah, against West Virginia, looking forward to that one. I mean, honestly, in a weird way, Stingray Super Regional sets up better for LSU than a normal regional, even though there's weaker teams, because they have 2 bona fide starters. Cade Anderson has been electric. Anthony Ianson has been great as well. And then now they needed a big performance in that last game against Little Rock, who hat tip to them. They were incredible that week. Kason Evans struck out 9 in a row. They got Bear Jones off the snide. He started hitting the ball really well. Luis Hernandez hit 2 home runs in that last game. So it felt like the bats got better and they had a pitcher step up when they needed to. So, West Virginia is kind of a quirky team. They're solid. They don't do anything that's like out of the realm, like, oh my God, you got to stop this guy or that guy. They're just a good ball team, top to bottom. So I still like LSU's chances there, and I know the people in Omaha are pulling for LSU because it's always more fun when the Tigers get to go up there.
Yes. All right. So let's move to the other team in the state of Alabama that is still performing and still in playing baseball, and that is the Auburn Tigers taking on the red hot Coastal Carolina Chanticleers. How do you see that one down in Auburn?
That's probably going to be the toughest matchup, I think, of all of them, because
Yeah.
the Chanticleers are playing as good a baseball as any. They've won 21 straight games,
Yeah.
and they just look on cruise control right now. And I think one of the things that Butch Thompson and their hitting coach Gabe Gross really have to focus on this week is kind of staying within yourself. And the reason why I say that, Stingray, is because this is the second best ERA in college baseball, so they can pitch. They're incredible about that. But also, it's the first time that Auburn's going to be hosting a super regional, and there's a chance to get way too amped for some of these things. And I've seen that like with Arkansas softball sometimes, where there's almost more pressure on you at home because you are at home. Everybody expects that. You're trying to almost do too much. So I think it's actually an advantage for Coastal Carolina, as crazy as this sounds, that they can keep that win streak on the road and put all the pressure on Auburn.
Yeah.
But it's a fun team. And I'm looking forward to watching just really the environment. And it's something that has been a long time coming for Butch, and he's made it to Omaha a couple of times already. This will be the first time he has to do it, and potentially celebrating at home.
So, Peter, now let's move to the SEC versus SEC matchup. Dave Van Horn versus Tony Vitello, Arkansas, and the Tennessee Volunteers. How do you see that one up in Fayetteville?
Yeah, I mean, we saw this one in the last regular season series of the year, or I think Arkansas took 2 or 3 from them in Fayetteville. And Tennessee, I mean, when you got Liam Doyle, you have a chance, right? I mean, he's the wild lefty, and if I'm Tennessee, I got to figure out what I'm going to do. Do I bring him back on short rest, or because they used him in that last game against Wake Forest, do you bring him back as your second guy and just kind of throw someone else out when they're going to throw Zach Root? And Zach Root, who's been pretty good for Arkansas, when he's on fire, but he had struggled once or twice this year. So we'll see how that plays out. I mean, top to bottom, the most complete team in college baseball, I think, despite the injuries, has been Arkansas.
Yeah.
The Aloy brothers have been great. The pitching staff, Gage Wood's been great. We saw Gackel come out of the bullpen, and he was fantastic last time we saw him. So this is the best team that he's probably had since they were, an out away from winning the College World Series in 2018. I think that they're ready to go. I think the problem with Tennessee right now is that defensively there always seems to make one or two mistakes, whether it's a big time error or it's, a couple of walks at the wrong time. Arkansas is that lineup that's going to make you pay for it. So I like Arkansas to advance. I'm hoping that Coastal Carolina does not show up with those arms. I am a little bit worried, but of course, I'm going to pull for the Auburn Tigers. I think they advance, and I feel confident about LSU because of the way the super regionals are set up, because they got two good arms.
So, Peter, everybody loves an underdog story. The two underdog stories that are still playing right now, Murray State is at Duke, and Texas San Antonio is at UCLA. Do you see either one of those, Texas San Antonio or Murray State, making it to Omaha?
I think UTSA is as good as anybody. We saw that against Texas. I mean, the Roadrunners have this kind of like bulldog mentality where they don't give a damn about where they're playing. Like, I think that they're excited to go out west and be like, all right, this is how we roll out here. And so it's a bunch of guys that didn't get recruited by Texas or by A&M or by some of the quote unquote big name programs. And you could tell that kind of fired them up. So I'd love to see Texas San Antonio as kind of that underdog. I think Murray State might be in a little bit of world of hurt. I think they just caught lightning in a bottle. Yeah. But I think it's UTSA that ends up advances to Omaha.
And Peter, as we walk out the door, I have asked everybody this question. Have you ever seen a collapse this season like we saw in College Station with the Texas A&M Aggies? What do you think happened?
Yeah, I mean, they got injured. They got injured at the wrong places. Graven Gahovic early in the season got injured, and that was kind of one of their leaders. And then Jace Lavalette, of course, he got injured right at the end of the season. But, it's one of those deals where I think that there was a lot of, hey, we're going to hire Michael early because the guys on the team love him. And so we don't want all these players to leave after Sloss left. And I'm not saying that's a wrong hire, because I really like Michael. I think he could be very good. He kind of reminds me of what Rob Vaughn can be over at Alabama as well, too, like an up and coming coach that the players love, kind of like how Tony Vitello's that guy. But it's a lot to learn from. I like the fact that he's going to get at least another year. Trev Alward's giving him a kind of a vote of confidence. So, the players like him. It's just a matter of, hey, I think the expectations were a little much, and he's got to also understand, like, and it's not his fault, but there's a lot that comes with being a coach in the SEC, and it's not just getting to the ballpark. So, I'd like to see it. Like I said, it just comes at a time where, A&M was the number one team in the country to start the season. They don't make the postseason. Yes. A&M softball was the overall number one seed, and they didn't even make it to a super regional. So it is it's interesting times right there. Mike Elko needs to make sure his football team is ready to play right from the get-go, Stingray.
So, Peter, we know that we're getting at least one team in Omaha, the winner of Tennessee and Arkansas. Enjoy covering it from Omaha, because I know the SEC network is going out there. Have a blast covering it, and we will catch up with you later on, my friend.
Stingray, thank you for the invite, man. Have a great weekend, and we'll catch us over doing all the coverage on SEC Network, all right?
And Peter, I will leave you with this just for you, my friend. Go Tigers.
There you go. There you go, my man. He's doing it for me. Thanks, Stingray.
Thank you. All right, so guys, that is going to wrap up the interview there with Peter Burns. Really do want to thank him for joining me.